Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. You're watching Laravel 5.5 new features, and we are watching the final video in the series, video number 14. Now in this video, we're going to be covering API resources. This is a brand new concept, and it's a big concept that's coming to Laravel 5.5. This is a really big feature. This is really like akin to inventing controllers. It's a really, really big deal. And especially for those of you guys that build APIs, it's going to make your job of building APIs a whole lot easier. I'm really excited about this. I've already been thinking about ways I could build like a mini API microservice because I kind of want to play with this a little bit more. Now, for those of you guys, before we dive into the content, I just want to say thank you guys for everyone that's watched every video up to this point. 14 videos, that's a lot of videos. Thanks so much for tuning in to all of them. If you haven't subscribed already and you like the content, I would love if you subscribed. It'll make sure you get all the content as it becomes available. Also, like your favorite videos. Let me know which ones are your favorites and leave comments if you have any questions. With all that being said, let's dive into the final video and let's take a look at this powerful new feature called API resources. Now, the best way to look at what API resources are is to actually start working with them. Now, API resources are something that, like, for those of you guys that have built APIs, you're going to be shouting for joy because it's going to make so much sense and you're going to be so excited. For those of you guys that haven't built APIs before, and I'm talking about building APIs where you are the one sending back the data from the API request, not consuming them. But for those of you guys that haven't built them, you might not quite get the big deal about what this feature is all about. But it's a big one. It's going to be really cool. And building APIs is going to be awesome after it's said and done. Okay, so let's go through and let's start by creating a resource. And this is a brand new thing that is in this version of Laravel. We're going to do PHP artisan make :resource. Now, this has nothing to do with like a controller resource. A resourceful controller. This is like it's called an API resource. We're going to give this a name, and in our case, it's going to be user because we want this to link to the user model. Now, what a resource is, and the resource was created here, but I like to think about resources as templates. You're basically creating a template for how you want JSON data to be returned to a user in the event of an API request. So there's lots of reasons for this, and I'll just show you real quick. The file that we created is inside app HTTP. It's next to our controllers, but it's got its own folder called resources, and then we've got our user.php, and this is what it looks like. I'll talk while you guys take a look at this code here, but basically this is a template. You're creating a template on how you want the JSON payload to be delivered, what you want it to look like, how you want it formatted, and stuff like that. It makes it really easy to kind of put in slots saying like, I want the name to be here. I want to have this structure. You can outline all of that in this file. And then when you want to deliver an API payload or a JSON payload, you basically run it through this template. So you just take your normal object, like your user object, you run it through this template, and this template is going to return to the user the way you've designed your API payload, the actual JSON object that gets returned back to you. So think about this as a template. We're going to build a template for how we want our JSON to look and be structured. And then all we do after that is, that's the resource, is the template. And then from there, all we do is we take, whenever someone requests like a user, we're just going to grab the user object out of the database. So it's got the raw database model, and then we just pass it through our template, and then the template is going to return everything to the user. So we only have to worry about structuring it in this template. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this out. Now, let's show you guys kind of what it looks like from the beginning. This right here is just kind of a default setup. It just takes the parent, turns it into an array. Let's see exactly what that does. So for that, let's go into our routes file, set it up. We're going to use this closure that we created here. We'll just create another one. We're going to call this /JSON. I'll just run it inside this routes file. Now, normally you would definitely run this inside of a controller instead of inside your routes file. But just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to do it like this. So what we're going to do here is we are going to pull in our user model. Okay, so we're going to say use app/user, and then we also are going to want to pull in this resource that we just created. So we're going to do app/http/resources/user, just following this structure that we've got over here. Okay. And so with that, we cannot do that because you can't have two imports called both user. So we got to name one of them something else. So we're going to call this user resource just to make it different. And then let's go through down here, just like you normally would in your controller. We'll get your user, we'll find the first user, and then we're just going to return that back. Usually, sometimes if it was a HTML request, you would return a view, right? And you would pass the user into the view. And then for a JSON request, you would just want to return your JSON. But what we're going to want to do is we are returning JSON because we're assuming this is an API request. But instead of just returning it like just doing a JSON encode, what we're going to do is we're going to pass it through this resource template to convert it into the JSON that we want. So let's do user resource. And then we will say, we'll pass in the user. And this is an object. So user resource, just like that. Okay, so there we go. So let's just see what this looks like before we've customized anything. And here we go. So this is what it looks like. So you've got everything's wrapped inside of your data. So that's one of the first nice things. Everything's inside of that data object inside of here. So you have that wrapper. And then we just basically takes everything and it basically did a basic JSON encode of your stuff from your directly from the object. So now let's say you don't want these stamps. You don't want these created at and updated stamps. That's proprietary information. You also don't really need the ID number because technically, although you could, but they probably requested it with the ID number, so you probably don't need to submit it. Let's say you just wanted name and email for whatever reason. So what we can do is we can customize the way that payload's returned by editing this user resource. So we'll come up here, take a look at this file, and here's where we're going to customize it. So we'll go through and we're going to tell it to return, for example, name, and then we'll just say this name, and then we'll tell it email, and we'll just tell it to output this email, just like that. Now let's go back and just refresh it. And now you can see that what's returned, again, we don't change anything over here, and this user object that we have that we're passing in still contains the created at and updated at fields, but and the ID, but we don't want that output to the user as part of the JSON. And so we were able to shove it through that template, that resource, and then when it comes out on the other end, doesn't include that. So it allows us to customize this. Now you might think, again, for those of you guys that have built APIs, you're already like, your mind's racing with all these possibilities. Those of you guys that may not have are still wondering kind of what the big deal is. Well, some of the things that's nice about this that I'll just kind of show you. Now, one of the things that's really nice about this is sometimes you want to like give data. Not only do you want to hide certain pieces of information, but you might want to also add information that doesn't directly correlate with a database column. So let's say as an example, just as one example, let's say that you want to pass in the full name as part of the JSON request. So here we want to pass in the full name just as a normal string, first name, last name. But let's say in your database table, you actually don't store the full name. You store a first name and you store a last name. Okay, you don't in two different columns. So what you could do now is you could say like first name space, and then you could do this last name. Now, of course, I can't really show this because it won't work because we don't have a first name and last name column in our database. But this would allow you that if you did have it set up that way, you could now just return a simple name, and then it would basically build that and then put it into that name field. So you're going to get the exact same results, but you can have, it doesn't have to match your database structure perfectly. And this is where it becomes really convenient to have all these additional features, is when you want to build a structure and show something that's not a perfect replication of your database. Another example of this would be something like, since this is a user payload, you might have like the profile, and this would be like the link to where their user profile is. And so here again, you would never store your user profile in the database. Like, it really wouldn't make sense because your user profile is built up of like the user ID. So you would normally have something like this, right? You would have users.show, and then you would have a second parameter of this ID, and then that would generate basically the profile URL. But so let's say you wanted to pass the link for the user profile as part of the JSON payload, but you don't actually like store that in the database. This allows you to basically build that. So once again, you're basically creating a template here where you say, okay, well, we're giving them the name. Now the name is made up of the first name column and the last name column with the space in between. We're giving them the email or whatever. We also want them to have the profile link, and then this is where the profile link comes from. You're able to basically tell Laravel how to build the JSON payload, even though it's not a perfect match to your database. It's super cool. Now we can't do this because we don't have named routes set up for our users, but we could just do something like URL users slash, and then we'll, okay, so like right here, I just created another user profile. And then here, let's go back to just name, just because of our example. And now if we return that, you're going to get, now see, we actually build that out. And so we're able to customize kind of the return. Now let's say you notice everything's wrapped inside of data, super convenient, right? Let's say you want to add some additional information. This is very standard because normally you'll have all the data from your request, and then sometimes you'll have additional keys at that same layer as data that might be other pieces of information like your API version, or maybe you might have some legal information about the terms of service or attribution or things like that that need to be in every single payload request. And so you can attach those simply inside of here. You're still building out that template. So what we can do is we can create another function called with, and it has to be called with. That's a special name. And everything we put inside of here, so everything up here is going to be inside of the data object. So notice that we're not actually creating that data, that data field. It actually is automatically wrapping everything inside of that's in here inside of that data field. And then when we have this with method, this is everything that goes outside the data field, but at the same level. So here we can return another array, and we can have additional information. So for example, like if we wanted to have version, we could attribute our, let's say version 2.0, just so that it's part of the payload request. We could also have like, you could have how many API calls remaining. And you could also attach this. So you could get basically like, we don't have this set up, but you could get like the currently logged in users that's just authenticated, API calls remaining. And let's just say this was a method inside of your model, you could call that, right? And so that would render how many API calls they have left for the day or something like that. I'm just giving you guys ideas for how you could build this out. Another like common thing is attribution. This is super common. And so normally you'll have like, I don't know, like a URL, I don't know, legal or terms of service or something. And just different things like that. So there's tons of stuff you can do inside of here. So like another example, like valid as of, you would basically timestamp when this was received so that you could say, well, that data was only valid as of this time. So then you could do something like date, date stamp in here like that. There we go. Okay, so now from here, we're able to add these other pieces of information. Now let's take a look in the browser and see what this looks like. Okay, so here we go. So you can see we've got our data object here, and then at the same level, we also have our version, we have our attribution, we have our valid, where we're actually creating a date. And so once again, we're able to basically create a very customized JSON object thanks to our templates here. And it allows us to basically customize it exactly to our needs. The other reason this can be helpful is if your database changes or your project changes, you can still maintain that same structure even if the structure that your database uses is different. You can still kind of build out the same structure here. And it just becomes so convenient because once we build this once, you're done. You've created the structure exactly as you want it. And then all you're doing then is just grabbing the user object, passing it in, and you don't have to worry about it. So it's just super, super easy. Let me show you a couple other things before we finish up. So one thing I want to show you guys is, let's say you didn't want the data object. So everything inside of here is wrapped inside of the data object. Let's say you just wanted to pass the data, but you don't necessarily need that data object. You don't want anything like that. Well, you can customize that if you get rid of the with here. We can go over to our service provider. So go to our app service provider, and we can tell it not to render with the wrappings. So up here at the top, we can run this command called resource, and then we'll say without wrappings. And that's going to tell it not to wrap around that, not to wrap that data object. Now we do have to pull in this, this item here. This is illuminate. There we go. Okay, so now, and the other thing I wanted to mention, you notice I deleted, and if you go back over here, I deleted that with function. That with function, if you keep that with function in here, we're going to get the exact same. Okay, we actually spelled this wrong. So this needs to be without wrapping. Sorry. Without wrapping. There we go. Okay, now let's try this again. So, okay, so you can see that it still performs it. It still wraps it in a data object. The reason it does that is because Laravel's smart and it knows you have these other objects. And so it's saying, if you have these other items, then you have to have a data object like that. So you do, if you get rid of this though, now it will get rid of the data objects. Now it's like, okay, you don't want wrappers, and you've got the, all you've got here, you're just passing in data. You don't have any other attributes. It'll go ahead and just give you the raw data without that data wrappers. So that's another kind of cool feature like that. And then it's also smart because this is application wide. So you can say, hey, in general, I want it without wrappers. But if you did want it with wrapping on this resource, because you might have multiple resources, you have your with method with the other items that you want, and then it's going to go ahead and wrap this data in the data method, and then this one, you'll have your other fields like that. So if you come here, you can see, there you go. So now you've got the data object back, and then your other items, even though your app service provider still has the wrapper set up. Okay, so that's cool. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to show you guys. Next, we're going to take a look at another form of resource called resource collections. It's pretty basic, but it's just it's a way to handle more than one object. So here you've got you're passing in one object like that. And now I want to show you guys how you would pass in, theoretically, a collection of objects. Okay, so to do that, let's go back over to our terminal. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to create a resource, but we're going to give it the name of collection at the end, or you can also pass in a field called collection. So we're just going to call it collection. So now you can see it. Last time it said resource created successfully. Now it says resource collection created successfully. And now we have another one called resource collection. You can see here it just returns the parent array. So now if we go back over here, instead of we'll do both of them, but instead of just importing the normal resource, we're also going to import the collection, and we don't need this. And now instead of user resource, we'll do user collection, and let's now get more than one item. So here we'll just say get all. Okay, so now we're getting all of the users, and then we're passing it into a user collection. So let's see how that handles itself a little differently. Okay, so now it's going to be handled a little bit differently. So we still have our, let's get rid of our, we normally would have a data object in here. So let's go ahead and get rid of our, let's comment this out real quick. Normally I wouldn't recommend doing this. I just wanted to show you guys that it exists. Okay, so now you can see we have our data object. We have all 10 of our users in here. And then what's interesting now, you'll notice that each individual user follows the format that we set in. See, we're not getting the full project. We're getting the exact same format that we set up in our normal user one. So it kind of follows that. It's kind of, it inherits everything below it. So here we've got a collection of users, and we're managing a large collection, but each individual user follows the format that we already created. So that's really cool as well. Now, of course, you can customize that in here as well. So we go to user collection. You can do the same thing you did before, where you can set up an array and you can customize all those different elements. I'm not going to go through that because it basically works the exact same way as the other one, but you can customize, and you can look at the documentation for this, how to handle these collections differently than you would handle a specific individual item. Now, the biggest reason I want to show you guys collections is for pagination. So a lot of times, let's say you've got a blog post type API. What we want to do this time is, instead of showing you all of them, we're going to paginate, and let's show you 3 at a time. Okay? So we're showing 3 users at a time. So this users object now is a paginated users object. That's all I've changed. Everything like in here is the same. Let's go take a look in the browser. Okay, so now this is what it looks like in the browser. This is one of the benefits of using the collections object is this. So here we've got our 3 items, because remember, we paginated it, so we only wanted to show 3 at a time. So these are the first 3 that we've got. But then we have this other field of links. This gives you links to how to get to page 1, the last page, the next page. The previous page is null because we're on the first page. So it has all this information automatically given to us. There's also some other meta information about pagination in here, like the total number of items, the current page we're on, and so forth. So this is another really useful thing. All this is handled for you automatically. Another thing just to keep in mind is in your user collections, you still have access to the public function with, so you can still do it the same as you did in the other ones. So just kind of wanted to show you that. Last thing I want to show you guys, we're going to create a, first of all, I guess I should have shown this before. You guys kind of goes without understanding, but let's say you want to show them all of the posts that a user has as well. So here we can actually submit relationships as well. So I've established a relationship inside of our user model. If you go over to user model, we've got our posts, and it's a many one-to-many relationship. So inside of here, we can just say this posts, and we can render that out as well. Okay, so if you come over here, over there, Chrome. Oh, let's not do a collection. Hold on, let's come back. Where's our web? Okay, just want to show one user. Okay, so here we go. So we've got just one user. If I close this data, here we go. We're back to having our other information submitted. And then inside of here, you can see we've got our name, our email, and then we've got our field of posts. And then inside of there, we show each individual post as well. Okay, so this is pretty cool. And then the other thing about this that you can customize is you can also then generate a resource for your post. You can customize the output of that, and then this will follow that. It'll actually inherit that as well. So you can customize how those are output as well, or you can always customize it inside of here. You could do the exact same thing where you could say, hey, we're going to get the, you could say something like now the title, and we only want to show the title, and it'll be, you know, this post's title or whatever. You can still customize it that way where you filled out those. So you have lots of options here. Again, you're building these templates. So that's how I like to think about what resources are, is they're like templates, and you're creating a template like this. But yeah, this will inherit, if you have a post resource, you customize the post resource, this will inherit that as well. The other thing that this will honor is your hidden fields. So like, for example, let's say this user ID, let's say we want to hide the user ID from posts. We can do that if we go to our post model, and inside of here, let's create a hidden attribute. Okay, and now let's just hide, we'll just need one item. Let's hide user ID. And maybe we want to hide featured too, just as an example. Okay, or maybe the created at. Okay, so we want to hide those 2 items, and then this will automatically be honored inside of here. So now you can see we have our posts, ID, title, content. We have our updated app, we don't have our created app, and then we have featured, but we don't have user ID. So it honors all of that as well. So that's a lot of information, guys. I just wanted to throw it all at you. That's basically user resources. That covers it in pretty good detail. Now there's still a lot to be covered inside of here. So if you want to go to Laravel.com, I will link this in the description. You can search resources. It's this new item called Eloquent API resources, and you can take a look at them a little bit better. So this goes over a lot of what I covered, but there's also some other advanced stuff that that I didn't cover. Like, for example, you can do things like conditional attributes. So you could say, hey, this secret field is only visible to admins. You can really get fancy with this stuff, guys. It's really, really cool. There's all sorts of great stuff you can do down here. You can merge attributes, conditionals. You can add pivot tables in there. Yeah, like more metadata. Like, there's a lot of stuff in here. I didn't want to go over everything because it would be an hour-long video, and it's already a 20-minute video. So anyway, that's API resources in a nutshell. If you guys are creating an API, this is going to make your life so much easier. You can generate a template now for your JSON API resource, everything you pass through there, and you're going to be able to return to the people consuming your API exactly the format that you want. This is a really, really cool feature, and honestly, I don't think it got enough. Not a lot of people are talking about this. I was pretty impressed. This is a big, big feature of Laravel 5.5. So what is your guys' favorite feature of Laravel 5.5? Leave a comment below. Let me know what your favorite feature was. For me, my favorite feature is package auto discovery. We don't have to worry about those config files, messing around with those files there. And the other one I'm really excited about is custom validation rules. Being able to make those custom validation rules as an object is something that I'm super stoked about. I've always had to make one. I feel like I've always had to do custom validation in every project I've done, at least one validation rule. And I didn't like doing it in the service provider. And I really like the format of creating a rule, like this rule object, and then running it out of that. I really like that. It just feels more natural for me. It doesn't feel as like ghetto. Having this closure inside of a service provider was just kind of funky, but having like an object, I like working with objects. It's really natural for me. So those are my two favorite features. Is the package auto discovery just gets rid of some unnecessary stuff. I've always thought forever that I'm like, why do we have this? This is just so unnecessary. But, and then obviously custom validation rules. So that's all I got for you guys today. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you guys enjoyed the series, feel free to drop me a comment over on Twitter. My hashtag is _JACurtis. You can reach out to me there. That's my Twitter handle. You can also email me hello@jacurtis.com if you have any questions as well. I'd love to help you. I try my best to answer those, but Twitter is definitely the best way to get a hold of me. Okay, thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I will see you guys in the next series. Until then.